What happens when quiet dignity meets outright discrimination on a crowded airplane? Dr. Selena Ward, a poised and powerful federal ethics advisor, boarded a routine flight expecting nothing but the familiar calm of first class. Instead, she faced a storm of judgment from a flight attendant who whispered that her seat was too small for someone like her, a cruel insult that echoed far beyond the cabin walls. But this was no ordinary passenger. Behind Selena's composed exterior lies a fierce strength forged through years of overcoming injustice and a refusal to be silenced. When authority challenges her right to simply exist, she answers not with anger or shouting, but with quiet power that unsettles an entire airline and sets off a chain reaction shaking corporate walls and federal agencies alike. How does one woman's calm resistance ignite a movement? What unseen battles lie beneath the surface of polite society? And what does it really take to transform prejudice into change? Join us as we unpack the unforgettable story of Dr. Selena Ward, a story of courage, resilience, and the fight for dignity that resonates far beyond the clouds. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Real Life Stories. New, your voice matters. Let's begin. It was 2:42 p.m. at Northbridge International Airport, Terminal C, Gate A12. The hum of flight announcements mixed with the occasional clatter of rolling luggage. Passengers stood in a slow-moving line, faces half glued to their phones, waiting to board the Stratusjet Airways flight to Washington, D.C. Dr. Selena Ward stood toward the front of the priority boarding queue, calm, composed, and dressed with the kind of elegance that didn't shout wealth, it whispered authority. Her navy blazer was sharply pressed, her slacks tailored, her shoes quiet but deliberate. Her only visible accessory was a silver lapel pin in the shape of a double helix, a nod to her early years in bioethics. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She never had. Still, she noticed the glance. It wasn't long, not even a full second, but it was the kind of look you felt before you saw. A quick flick of the eyes, then a forced smile, barely masking disapproval. The glance came from a middle-aged flight attendant reviewing IDs near the boarding door. Her name tag read Greta. Her posture was rigid. Her voice clipped as she scanned boarding passes. Selena took a breath and exhaled through her nose. She'd seen that glance in boardrooms, in airport lounges, even in the back of town cars. It was the look that came right before someone decided who you were before asking you anything at all. But Selena didn't flinch. She stepped forward when called and handed over her boarding pass and federal identification. First class, seat 2A. Greta looked down at the pass, then up again. Her eyes swept over Selena's body, not in curiosity, but in quiet judgment. Her lips tightened slightly, and for a second, Selena thought she might say nothing. But then it came. That seat might be a bit snug, Greta said with a half laugh, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. You sure you're in the right row? A subtle silence fell over the gate. A few passengers looked up from their phones. One man squinted, uncertain whether he heard correctly. A woman a few spots back paused her scrolling. Greta's tone hadn't been overtly cruel. It was worse. It was patronizing. Selena didn't respond at first. She looked at Greta not with anger, but with the kind of long, steady gaze that made silence feel heavy. It wasn't a confrontation. It was observation. Yes, Selena said calmly. I'm in the right row. Greta gave a tight smile and scanned her pass with a slow beep. Just checking, she muttered. Sometimes there's confusion with tickets. Selina walked down the jet bridge with her bag rolling quietly behind her, the echo of Greta's words lingering like a bitter aftertaste. Inside the cabin, flight attendants moved quickly, adjusting tray tables and fluffing pillows for the first-class passengers. Selina stowed her carry-on and sat down in seat 2A. The leather was cool, the window slightly smudged from a previous passenger. She folded her coat neatly and placed it beside her. She tried to relax, but her thoughts wouldn't let her. It wasn't just about the comment. It was the implication that her body, her presence, her very existence didn't quite fit, that she had taken a seat someone else was more entitled to, that somehow, despite her degrees, her clearance, her years of service, she still had to prove herself. Selina stared out the window, watching the tarmac bustle with fuel trucks and ground crew in fluorescent vests. Her phone buzzed a calendar reminder for her ethics panel at the Pentagon the next morning. She was here for government work, serious work. And yet, here she was, being second-guessed over a seat. She shifted slightly, adjusting the seatbelt across her lap. The belt clicked without struggle. Of course it did. In the row ahead, an older woman peeked back briefly. Their eyes met. The woman offered a small smile, empathetic, maybe, or just curious. Selina nodded politely. A few minutes passed before she saw Greta re-enter the cabin from the jet bridge, whisper something to another flight attendant, then glance directly at Selina again. That same tight-lipped smile, that same loaded glance. Selina's chest tightened, not with rage, but with that familiar ache, the one that came from being seen but not known, labeled but not heard. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered something her mother used to say, "You'll be judged before you speak. So let your silence speak volumes." But Selina wasn't sure silence was enough anymore. She opened her eyes and reached for her tablet, not to email anyone, just to ground herself. She scrolled briefly through headlines, then checked the Wi-Fi login for the flight, not yet activated. Then, just as she was about to put the tablet away, she heard Greta again. "I may need to verify something about seat 2A, Greta said, her voice louder now, speaking to a younger male flight attendant. He blinked. Is there an issue? I'm just not convinced the ticket is legitimate," she said, nodding toward Selina. "We've had mix-ups before. Better to double-check." This time, Selina heard it clearly. So did the passenger across the aisle. So did the teenage girl in row 3 who had already pulled out her phone. A soft recording beep sounded in the air, and this time, Selina turned. Not sharply, not emotionally, just enough. She met Greta's eyes across the cabin. "Are you questioning my seat assignment or my presence in it?" she asked, her voice low, deliberate. The air shifted again. Greta blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "It's just a precaution," she said, faltering. "Sometimes people book under the wrong tier or use someone else's information." "I see," Selina replied. "Would you like to see my federal clearance again?" There was no hostility in her tone, but it carried the weight of someone who had to ask that question too many times. The passengers were quiet now. Even the baby in row 5 had gone still. The young flight attendant looked from Greta to Selina and then muttered, "I'll get the supervisor." As he walked briskly toward the front, Selina sat back in her seat again. She adjusted her posture and waited. Because this flight wasn't going anywhere just yet. but something else, something bigger that had already taken off. Trevor Lang moved quickly, but not confidently. The slim, 30-something gate supervisor adjusted his badge lanyard 3 times as he walked down the narrow aisle toward first class. His face already carried the tension of someone who had handled too many small fires today and was now heading toward one he knew might become a wildfire. Behind him, the cabin was mostly full. Dozens of eyes flicked up to watch. Phones were still in hands, some already tilted upward at subtle angles. The teenage girl in row 3, Tessa Bloom, hadn't stopped recording. Her camera was steady, her expression unreadable. Selena Ward sat in seat 2A, her hands folded gently on her lap, her face calm, her body still, her presence unshaken. She had not moved since asking Greta whether the issue was her boarding pass or her presence, and now she waited. Trevor reached Greta first. She met him at the divider curtain with an exasperated sigh and launched into her explanation. Her voice just low enough to sound professional but loud enough for the front row to hear. She showed a pass for 2A, Greta said, gesturing in Selena's direction. But something feels off. I've seen fake bookings before, and I just want to be sure. And, honestly, the seatbelt might not even fit safely. Trevor's eyebrows rose. You're saying you think it's a fraud case? Greta crossed her arms. Look, I'm not accusing. I'm just saying we need to confirm her ID and status. This happens more than you think. Trevor glanced nervously down the aisle, where Selena sat motionless, her eyes now lifted toward him. Not aggressive, not pleading, simply present, watching, waiting. He stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, trying to steady his voice, "may I take a quick look at your boarding pass and ID?" Selena reached calmly into her handbag and pulled out the items without a word. She handed over her boarding pass, her federal contractor badge, and her DOD clearance card. Her hands didn't tremble. Trevor examined the documents. His mouth opened slightly as he read her name, then the platinum-level status, then the small embossed seal on the corner of the ID card, Dr. Selena Ward. He read aloud without realizing. "Yes," she replied. "Ethics Oversight Division, Department of Federal Accountability." A long beat passed. Trevor blinked. See?" He handed the documents back carefully. "Everything appears to be in order." But before he could step back, Greta interjected, "Hold on. Anyone could print a fake badge. I still say it's unsafe. These seats have weight limits, you know." The words hung in the air like smoke after a firework. A sharp breath was heard from a woman in 3C. The man across the aisle closed his laptop without looking away. Even Trevor looked stunned. Selena didn't move. Her voice was measured, even soft. "Are you making this about my weight now?" Greta stepped back slightly. "I'm just saying we need to consider comfort and balance in the cabin. You know, distribution." Tessa Bloom's voice, though quiet, was picked up by her phone's mic. Did she just say distribution? What does that even mean? Trevor looked trapped. His hands twitched at his sides, unsure where to rest. "Maybe we should get a second opinion," he mumbled, "just to make sure protocol's being followed." Selena turned slightly toward him. "Protocol is a beautiful thing when it's applied evenly," she said. "But if this is about comfort, perhaps you should ask the man in 2C if his size qualifies him for reassignment as well." All eyes turned to the man in 2C. He was easily twice Selena's width. He turned red, then shook his head firmly. "I'm comfortable," he muttered. and no one asked me a thing. The tension was thick now. A slow rustle of murmurs moved through the cabin. Someone in row 4 muttered, "This is getting ridiculous." Another passenger whispered, "This is gonna be all over TikTok." Selena's heart beat steadily in her chest, but her mind was a storm. She had learned to be composed. Years of being the only black woman in rooms filled with judgment had trained her to navigate discomfort without showing pain. But this wasn't discomfort. This was humiliation, dressed in policy, draped in plausible deniability. She thought of her father, a military man, dignified, kind, always reminding her, "They will try to shrink you. Selena, don't you dare hand them the scissors." She inhaled deeply. Her voice came low but firm. "If you're going to remove me," she said, "do it on record. Speak clearly. Let the cabin hear you. Don't hide behind policy you're twisting to mask your discomfort." The silence that followed was absolute. Trevor shifted, visibly sweating now. "No one is removing you. Ma'am, that's not what's happening." Greta's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't let her intimidate you." "Trevor." Tessa Bloom's camera caught it all. Selena calmly reached into her bag again and pulled out her phone. She typed in a number, pressed call. After 2 rings, a deep male voice answered. "Director Ellery, Marcus, this is Selena Ward," she said, her voice smooth but audible across the first-class cabin. "I'm being obstructed on a commercial flight. There's an issue with my clearance being questioned. I'm requesting verification with StratusJet Airways and a call to Northbridge Aviation Security." There was a pause. Then, on speaker, Director Ellery said just one word. "Understood." Click. Selena set her phone down on the tray table. Greta blanched. Trevor took a step back. The woman in 3C whispered, "Holy hell." She just called the government. The air felt different now, like the cabin had dropped a few degrees. Selena leaned back in her seat and stared straight ahead. She had done nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but the fight had started, and every eye was on her. The hush in the first-class cabin was no longer casual. It was loaded. Passengers sat quietly in their seats. The way people do when they sense something bigger than them is unfolding, like the moment before a verdict or a storm. Phones remained tilted just enough to film. Comments on Tessa Bloom's stream were already in the thousands. Trevor Lang stood frozen beside seat 2A. His fingers still curled loosely at his sides, his thoughts moving faster than his body. He had dealt with delays before. Angry passengers, lost luggage, even a man once screaming about not getting peanuts. But this a government contractor being questioned on record, cameras rolling, and Greta Mullins refusing to let it go. He turned toward Greta, his voice low. "Greta, we should really step outside the cabin and sort this before it escalates." Greta shook her head. "No, we're not leaving her here unattended. She's manipulating the situation and now calling in threats from federal offices. That's intimidation." Trevor stared at her. That wasn't a threat. That was a request for verification, and she didn't raise her voice once. Greta ignored him, folding her arms. "Passengers are getting nervous." "No, they're getting informed," said a voice from behind. It was the man in 2C. He leaned forward slightly. "There's a difference." Trevor looked back at Selena, who hadn't moved since her phone call ended. Her hands were back in her lap, her eyes fixed forward. She was still calm, but now there was something in her stillness, something deliberate. It wasn't passivity, it was control. Trevor exhaled. "All right, he said, pulling out his radio. "I'm calling in aviation security. Just for clarity, we need this handled properly." Selina didn't flinch. She nodded once, but inside her chest, a quiet battle was happening. A part of her still questioned whether this was worth the noise, whether standing her ground in front of dozens of strangers and cameras and phones would turn her into something she didn't want to be: a headline, a spectacle, another angry black woman narrative, twisted by someone with a Twitter account and a grudge. But the other part of her, the deeper part, knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every quiet woman who bit her tongue in a boardroom, every mother who was told to step aside at a check-in counter, every teenage girl who internalized the lie that worth had a weight limit. She thought about the policy paper she had just finished drafting the week before. It was titled "Invisibility by Design: The Subtle Mechanisms of Structural Bias." And now, here she was living its thesis in real time. She closed her eyes briefly, grounded herself, then opened them again. Across the aisle, Tessa Bloom was still filming. But this time, her hand was trembling slightly. Her eyes met Selina's, and for a moment, they just looked at one another. Tessa lowered her phone. Outside the cabin, Trevor's voice crackled through the gate area. "This is Lang at Gate A12, requesting security presence in first class. We've got a situation involving passenger verification and staff conduct, possible discrimination escalation." He paused, as if the last phrase hurt his mouth. Then he clicked off the radio. Back in the cabin, Greta had begun pacing slightly, adjusting her scarf, tapping her ID badge. The more the cameras focused on her, the more unsettled she looked. And yet, she didn't sit down. She didn't apologize. She seemed to feed off the attention. "She's just trying to get me fired," Greta whispered to another flight attendant. "They always do this. One complaint, and suddenly your whole career's gone." The other attendant said nothing. Her eyes shifted quickly away. A new energy settled over the cabin. The passengers were no longer just watching. They were choosing sides, and it was not going well for Greta. Selina reached for her water and took a slow sip. Her throat had grown dry, but her voice would need to stay clear. She checked her phone. A single text blinked from Marcus Ellery. "Under review. Tell no one else. Stand by." She locked the screen and placed the phone face down. Then came the footsteps. 2 security officers boarded the aircraft. Officer Dean was tall, calm-eyed, with a bald head and a patient gait. Officer Rahman, younger, alert, and scanning the space like it was a chessboard with too many pieces out of place. Trevor met them at the front and whispered briefly. They nodded once, then made their way toward Selina. The entire front cabin followed their movement. Officer Dean stopped beside her. "Ma'am, we've been asked to verify identification. Would you be willing to provide documentation for clarity?" Selina nodded. Of course. She reached into her bag. No rush, no performance. She pulled out a sealed folder with a gold-trimmed DOD insignia and slid it across the tray table along with her credentials. Officer Rahman picked them up, examined them, and blinked twice. He passed them to Dean. The taller officer cleared his throat. "These credentials are authentic. There is no concern here." Trevor let out an audible breath. Even he had braced for something else. Greta, however, looked stunned. She could have faked all of it. She snapped. "You've seen those YouTube tutorials? Anyone with a printer and a laptop?" Dean turned toward her slowly. "Ma'am," he said with careful neutrality, I would advise you to stop speaking before this becomes a personnel issue." Greta's mouth opened, then closed. Selina didn't speak. She didn't need to. 1,000 people were already listening, and she had just won this round by doing exactly what they didn't expect. Remaining human. Remaining still. The silence that followed Officer Dean's statement felt different from the silences before. This one wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was heavy with finality. Passengers shifted slightly in their seats, glancing between one another as if they, too, sensed the shift in power. Selina remained still. Her credentials now sat in Officer Rahman's hands. He gently placed them back on her tray table, as if returning something sacred. He gave her a nod, one of those silent acknowledgments only people who understood certain battles could share. She nodded back. Trevor Lang stepped forward, trying to salvage what little composure he had left. "Thank you, officers. That will be all. Let's get everyone seated and move forward with pre-flight procedures." But the calm he tried to restore shattered the moment Greta Mullins took one step closer to Selina's seat. Her voice rang out, shrill this time. "This isn't over. I'm telling you, something is off. Just because she has fancy papers doesn't mean she belongs here. These first-class seats are limited for a reason, and she is clearly making this difficult." The gasp that rippled through the cabin felt like a physical wave. A woman in 1B muttered, "Oh my God." A man in row 4 let out a low whistle. Tessa Bloom's phone was still recording. The red light blinked steadily, catching every word, every breath. Officer Dean didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly. His voice was quiet when he spoke, and that made it even more dangerous. "Ma'am, step back and return to your post. This is no longer a discussion." Greta didn't listen. Her mouth kept moving, but the words blurred into background noise as Selina reached calmly for her phone. No dramatic flourish, no shaking hands. She opened her contact list and tapped a name without hesitation. A second later, the line clicked. "Ellery." Selina spoke clearly, not loudly, but with undeniable weight. "Marcus, I'm confirming obstruction. The airline has challenged federal clearance and ignored officer validation. The crew member in question continues verbal escalation in front of passengers." On the other end, there was only 1 second of pause before Director Marcus Ellery replied, "Understood. Stay seated. I'm contacting the Department of Civil Aviation and the FAA Oversight Office. You'll be contacted within 5 minutes. Do not engage further." The call ended. Selina placed the phone back on the tray table. Her fingers hovered above it for a moment before resting in her lap again. She was aware of every eye in the cabin. Some stared in awe, others with discomfort, but none looked away. Trevor swallowed hard and stepped between Greta and seat 2A. "That's enough," he said. His voice cracked, but he kept going. "Return to the galley. Now." Greta looked stunned. "You're taking her side." "No," Trevor said. "I'm following protocol. Something you claim to care about." She stared at him for a second too long, then spun on her heel and stormed toward the galley, her steps too sharp, her shoulder bumping the curtain divider as she passed through. Passengers exhaled as if they had all been holding their breath at once. Officer Dean turned to Selina one last time. "Will remain on board until further notice." She nodded. "Thank you." Then, quietly, she closed her eyes, not to sleep, not to escape, but to breathe. Inside her chest, her heart was finally slowing. The adrenaline was still there, but it no longer screamed. Now it hummed in quiet preparation. She knew this wasn't over. Power never surrendered easily, but the difference today was that she wasn't alone. Behind her eyes, memories flickered. The first time she was denied access to a faculty lounge even with a faculty ID, the conference where they assumed she was catering staff, the white colleague who quoted her idea in a meeting, word for word, and was praised for it while she was told to take notes. And now, a flight attendant in a position of customer trust had looked her up and down and decided she didn't belong. The insult wasn't the words, it was the assumption. A few minutes later, Selina felt a presence near her elbow. She opened her eyes. It was Tessa Bloom. The teenager stood at the edge of the row, holding her phone low. Her voice was quiet, almost shy. "Dr. Ward, I just wanted to say thank you for not backing down." Selina looked at her, really looked. Tessa's hair was in soft curls, her face bare of makeup, eyes wide with something between awe and worry. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her hands trembled slightly, as if they weren't used to carrying the weight of public moments. Selina gave her a small smile. "You're filming?" Tessa nodded. "Yeah, it's already blowing up. People are commenting nonstop. Most of them are angry. A lot of them are thankful." Selina hesitated. "I didn't do it for that." Tessa nodded again. "I know. That's why it matters." Selina looked away for a moment, toward the window, outside. The sun glinted off the edge of another aircraft taxiing down the runway. The light caught the glass just right and flared briefly. Maybe that's what justice looked like sometimes. Not thunder, not vengeance, just light catching the truth. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We are currently experiencing a brief delay due to an operational review. We appreciate your patience and will keep you informed as the situation develops." Translation people in higher places had been called. The woman in 3C leaned forward across the aisle. "If you ever run for office," she said, "you've got my vote." Selina laughed softly, the kind of laugh that didn't come from amusement, but from release, from exhaustion. "I'll take that under advisement," she said. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She answered. "Dr. Ward, this is Agent Helena Cross, Civil Aviation Oversight." Her voice was crisp, controlled. "I've just been briefed. I'll be boarding your flight in 3 minutes." Selina nodded slowly. The air in the cabin shifted again. A new storm was approaching, but this one might bring justice. The cabin buzzed with anticipation, but it wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet that felt loud, a tight coil of tension woven into every breath, every side glance, every shift of weight in a seat. People were no longer pretending not to listen. They were all in. Passengers whispered in pairs. Some speculated in hushed tones. Others sat stone still, eyes locked forward, but their ears picking up every word. It was no longer just about a passenger and a flight attendant. It had become something else. A woman in seat 3C, mid-40s, dressed in a blazer and jeans, looked back again. She whispered to the man next to her, "She's not backing down." Good. He nodded, took guts to stay this calm. I would have snapped already. In the row ahead, a toddler whimpered. Her mother rocked her gently, but even she looked toward the front with the cautious curiosity of someone watching history, not just a delay. Greta Mullins stood just behind the curtain now. She had been forced to step back, but her presence still lingered. Occasionally, her head would peek through, watching, waiting, calculating. Her lips moved in murmurs, maybe rehearsing what she'd say next, maybe trying to rewrite what had already been recorded. Trevor Lang remained near the flight deck, checking his radio every minute. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Selina Ward sat in seat 2A, still like stone, but breathing like wind, controlled, constant. She did not check her phone. She did not ask for water. She simply waited. But inside, she was anything but still. Her mind moved in careful lines, balancing the weight of truth with the cost of exposure. She had known this job would come with moments like this. What she hadn't expected was the familiarity of the ache it brought. The ache of being misread, mislabeled, and then being asked to justify your right to exist in a space you had paid for, earned, and already occupied. Her thoughts drifted back to her first year in law school, when she walked into a lecture late and the professor had asked if she was in the wrong room. Back to the gala where she was mistaken for hotel staff despite wearing a guest badge. Back to the job offer that came with the unspoken condition that she would smile more and stay out of public-facing issues. Back to the lunch table where her father once told her, "Sometimes they don't have to shut the door. They just stare until you turn around." She had never turned around, and she wasn't going to now. A movement to her left brought her back to the present. It was the young trainee flight attendant, barely older than Tessa, with a nervous energy that made his hands shake slightly as he held out a small bottle of water. "I thought you might need this," he said quietly. Selina looked at him. There was no fear in his eyes, only concern. A different kind of gaze than the one Greta had given her. This one saw her. She accepted the bottle and gave him a nod. "Thank you." He looked like he wanted to say more but wasn't sure how. So he nodded back and disappeared behind the curtain. Tessa Bloom, now seated again, refreshed her live stream. The comments had exploded. She scrolled slowly. "This is wild. She's a boss. This flight attendant is done. Who is this woman? Get her name Justice on 2A. Tessa glanced up and quietly angled her camera back toward the front, but not directly at Selina this time, just the space around her, the stillness, the storm and waiting. Then the intercom cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a brief additional delay as we welcome a representative from the Federal Aviation Oversight Authority. Thank you for your continued patience." Every head turned. Every phone lifted again. The tension grew like a second skin over the cabin. Then she boarded. Agent Helena Cross. She did not wear a uniform, but something far more commanding, a tailored black suit, sharp collar, no jewelry, no smile. Her presence was not loud, but it was absolute. She moved with the confidence of someone used to stepping into chaos and leaving with answers. Trevor Lang moved to greet her, but she raised one hand slightly. "Not now," she said. "Where is seat 2A?" Selina raised her hand gently. Cross approached. She didn't ask for credentials. She had already been briefed. "Dr. Ward," she said calmly. "I've reviewed your clearance, the incident log, and the stream footage. Would you like to make a formal statement now or after landing?" Selina replied with a voice as even as ever. "After landing is fine, unless you need immediate clarification." Cross nodded. "You've been more than clear already." Then she turned to face the front of the cabin. Her voice, when projected, was not raised, but it reached every passenger with ease. "This flight is under federal observation. Until the review is complete, no crew member involved in the incident will have further contact with passengers. Any attempt to interfere will be subject to immediate suspension and possible charges under federal aviation law. There was no applause, but there was relief. The woman in 3C whispered, "Finally." A man behind her muttered, "Took them long enough?" Cross made her way to Trevor and motioned toward the cockpit. "I'll brief the captain directly." As she walked away, Greta's head popped briefly through the curtain. Her face was red, jaw tight, eyes darting. She looked like a soldier who just realized the war was lost before the second battle began. Selina sat back, gently unscrewed the cap of the water bottle, and took a sip. Her heart still beat faster than she wanted, but she wasn't hiding from it. She was here, and she was still standing, even while seated. The air felt clearer after Agent Helena Cross delivered her message, but it was not calm, the kind of clarity that comes after a storm warning, not after the storm itself. Passengers settled back into their seats but continued glancing forward every few seconds. It was no longer curiosity, it was awareness, like the hush that settles over a courtroom when the judge walks in. People may not understand the laws, but they feel the weight of consequence. Selina Ward adjusted her seatbelt slightly. Her hand brushed the edge of her phone, but she left it untouched. Her call with Director Ellery had started the engine. Now, someone else was driving the change. She was still in the seat, but for once, she did not have to push it all herself. She let herself look around. The woman in 3C gave her a nod, subtle but firm. The man in 2C avoided her eyes, maybe embarrassed, maybe shaken. Tessa Bloom was still filming, but now she seemed more measured, as if even she understood this had outgrown viral content. This was no longer just something to post. This was something to witness. Selina turned to the window. Outside, sunlight danced across the tarmac. A food truck reversed slowly, its tires turning across paint lines that looked like veins on the concrete. Ground crew moved with precision. The world outside remained in motion, even while this flight stood still. Behind her, she heard it. Footsteps again, this time not soft, like the trainees before. Heavy, decisive, synchronized. 2 uniformed officers entered the cabin, not airport security. Federal. One wore the distinct silver badge of Federal Aviation Enforcement. The other carried a sealed tablet. They walked down the aisle like they had done this before, not once or twice, but often. Agent Cross turned to greet them. They spoke briefly, words low and clipped. Then she pointed toward Greta Mullins, who was now standing rigidly just outside the galley, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. One officer stepped toward her. "Greta Mullins," he asked, tone neutral. She nodded. "That's me. We need you to disembark the aircraft immediately. A formal investigation will proceed separately. For now, you are relieved of duty." Her voice came fast and defensive. "Relieved for what I followed policy." She was aggressive. She made me feel unsafe. You can't just remove me because she called someone. The officer didn't flinch. This is not about how you feel. It is about what you did. Your actions are under recorded review. You are not under arrest, but you are required to exit this plane now. Greta looked around, desperate for backup. No one moved. Not the captain, not the crew, not the passengers. Even Trevor stood behind the federal agents, his mouth slightly open, watching this like it was happening in a movie he had only just realized he was in. Greta's face twisted. She grabbed her bag, yanked it from its cubby, and walked down the aisle stiffly. Her steps were loud, but no one applauded. There was no need. Sometimes silence was louder than clapping. She passed Selina's seat without a word. Selina did not look at her. The moment Greta's feet touched the jet bridge, Agent Cross nodded to the lead officer and turned to the passengers. "Thank you for your patience. We are cleared to depart in 10 minutes. This flight will proceed without further disruption." A small collective exhale passed through the cabin. Trevor moved forward, speaking softly into his radio. The engines hummed faintly outside, preparing to start. The young trainee returned, standing nervously near the aisle. He leaned closer to Selina and said quietly, "If it means anything, I'm really sorry. We're not all like her." Selina looked at him for the first time that day. Her face softened. "I know," she said. He smiled awkwardly, then returned to his position. She leaned back into her seat and let her eyes close for a moment. It was not peace, not yet, but it was something close. Her mind drifted again, uninvited, to a time when she had been 15, walking into a science fair with her hair pulled into tight braids and a project on biodegradable water filters in her arms. She had watched as judges skipped over her table 3 times before finally stopping. One had asked who helped her build it. She had said, "No one." They'd smiled and given her an honorable mention, not a trophy, not a real place, just a pat on the head. She'd gone home that night and promised herself that the next time someone overlooked her, she wouldn't stay quiet. It had taken years to get here, but today she had kept that promise. The intercom came on. "This is your captain speaking. Thank you for your patience. We are now cleared for departure. Please remain seated as we complete final checks." The cabin lights dimmed. The plane's body shifted with preparation. Tessa Bloom leaned forward across the aisle. "Dr. Ward," she said softly, "I turned off the stream. I figured, I don't know. You deserve a moment." Selina smiled gently. "Thank you. People are already posting clips. News outlets are picking it up. Someone said you're a civil rights attorney." Selina chuckled lightly. "I'm a federal ethics advisor. That's slightly less glamorous." "Not today," Tessa replied. "Today, you were the whole show." Selina looked out the window again as the plane began to taxi. Outside, the runway stretched ahead like a question with no clear end, but she wasn't afraid of the unknown. Not anymore. She had faced worse than turbulence, and she was still flying. The plane glided down the runway, then lifted into the sky with a rumble that vibrated through every seat. A collective breath was held during takeoff and released slowly as the cabin leveled out above the clouds. The world below faded into abstraction. Roads looked like wires, buildings like toys. From this height, everything seemed small, but what had happened on the ground still sat heavy in the air. Selina Ward leaned her head against the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the faint double of the glass. Her eyes looked tired, but not defeated. Not today. The captain made a brief announcement. Cruising altitude. Smooth flight expected. Meal service in 20 minutes. It was the kind of voice meant to settle nerves. But the cabin didn't relax right away. People were still whispering, still digesting. The confrontation had ended, but the discomfort remained. Greta was gone, but her words lingered like smoke. Selina closed her eyes for a moment and let the hum of the engine soothe the edges of her thoughts. But another voice echoed in her mind, soft and familiar. Her mother's. "Respect won't always be given, but dignity, That's yours. No one can take it unless you let them. A deep breath in, a slow breath out. She was not angry, she was not scared, but she was tired. Tired of being the quiet example, the composed one, the professional in the room where everyone else got to be loud and imperfect. A soft voice broke the quiet. "Doctor." Ward Selina opened her eyes. It was the woman from 3C. She had crossed the aisle during the lull. "I don't mean to intrude," the woman said, hands folded nervously. "But I just wanted to thank you." Selina tilted her head slightly. "For what? For not losing your composure. For staying calm. I don't know if I could have done that." Selina offered a small smile. "Some days I'm not sure I can either." The woman gave a quiet laugh, then looked down. "I have 2 daughters," she said, "biracial. They've already had moments at school that made my heart break. I saw what you did today, and I realized that's what I want them to see. Someone who doesn't shrink." The words settled over Selina like a warm weight. "Then I'm glad I didn't stay silent," she replied. The woman nodded and returned to her seat. Across the aisle, Tessa Bloom looked up from her phone again. "Dr. Ward," Selina smiled softly. "Yes." Tessa hesitated. "I saw some of the comments on the stream. A few people are saying you probably overreacted, that maybe the flight attendant was just trying to do her job." Selina didn't answer right away. She considered the weight of that question, not because she hadn't heard it before, but because she had, too many times. She leaned forward slightly. "There's a difference between doing your job and using your job to shield your bias," she said. "It's easy to confuse the two, especially when the person targeted is taught not to push back." Tessa nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I get that." Selina continued. She didn't ask anyone else for weight verification, or identification, or clearance. Just me. And when every answer I gave her was valid, she found new reasons to doubt me. "Because you're black," Tessa asked gently. "Yes," Selina said. "That's the part people don't want to say out loud. But it was there, in her tone, in her need to be right, in her refusal to back down, even when the facts said otherwise." Tessa's fingers moved across her phone screen. "I think people need to hear this from you," she said. "Not just the clips. Your words." Selina looked thoughtful. "Maybe, when I'm ready." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew began to prepare for food service. A new attendant, a young man with kind eyes, moved down the aisle offering drinks. He reached Selina's row, paused, and gave her a soft nod. "Water tea," Selina smiled. "Tea, please." He nodded and poured carefully. Behind him, quiet conversations resumed. A new kind of energy was forming. Less tension, more reflection. People were beginning to talk about what they had seen. In the back rows, someone asked, "Do you think she'll sue?" A passenger replied, "She doesn't have to. The internet already did." Selina heard it, and for once, she didn't mind the whispers. She stirred her tea slowly. The steam rose in soft curls. She watched it rise and vanish. Then a memory returned. Her first time flying first class. It had been 10 years earlier, a last-minute upgrade on a business trip to San Francisco. She had been wearing a navy dress, her hair in a bun, heels that pinched her toes. The flight attendant had greeted every other passenger with a drink offer. Everyone but her. She remembered sitting there, unsure if it was intentional, telling herself not to assume, not to cause trouble, not to make anyone uncomfortable. She had said nothing that day. and it had eaten at her for weeks. Today, she had said everything by simply not moving, and that would stay with people longer than any lawsuit. The tea was warm in her hands now, comforting, centering. The woman in 3C waved from her seat again. Selina waved back. She looked out the window. Above the clouds, the world looked soft, quiet, forgiving. But below, things were shifting, and for once, she wasn't the one trying to change them. The world had seen what happened, and the bias that tried to hide behind protocol had finally been forced into the light. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt signs had turned off. The engines purred at a steady rhythm. Passengers shifted into quiet comfort, some reclined, some plugged in earbuds, others simply stared out at clouds that looked like vast blankets of snow. But first class was still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. The attendants, now led by a different crew chief, moved with a new awareness. Every glance held care. Every word was measured. They knew eyes were still on them, that phones were still recording, that trust, once broken, didn't rebuild itself by pretending nothing happened. Dr. Selina Ward didn't move much from her seat. She had no appetite for food, not because she wasn't hungry, but because her mind was still processing, not the event itself, but what it had ignited. She checked her phone. Messages had begun pouring in. Her assistant had texted twice. "Are you okay? Press is already on it. Should we respond?" Selina didn't answer yet. She wasn't ready to step into the media whirlwind. This wasn't about interviews. It wasn't even about her name. It was about something deeper. She looked up as Agent Helena Cross approached again. "Dr. Ward," she said gently, lowering her voice so only Selina could hear, "I wanted to inform you we've received confirmation. FAA leadership has initiated a formal review of the incident. The footage is already in their hands." Selina nodded once. "Thank you." Cross studied her for a beat. "You're incredibly composed. Most people would have made a scene. You didn't raise your voice once." Selina offered a faint smile. "That's not how I was raised." "Still," Cross added, "you've just put something in motion that few people ever manage." "I didn't plan to," Selina replied. "But when someone keeps pressing, even silence becomes a decision." Cross's expression shifted. Respect and something more admiration. She straightened. "If you're comfortable, I'll include you as a direct liaison when the internal case opens. They may request your presence for oversight hearings." "I'll be there," Selina said without hesitation. Cross gave a final nod and returned to the galley. Selina looked down at her hands, still resting on her lap. They weren't shaking, not anymore, but they were tired, not from fear, from history. Years of navigating spaces like this, years of knowing how to hold her posture so others wouldn't feel threatened, of rehearsing kindness so it couldn't be weaponized against her. A few rows back, Tessa Bloom had resumed editing clips from her footage. She wasn't posting everything, just fragments, moments, the right pieces, the truth without the noise. Selina appreciated that. She didn't want this to be a scandal. She wanted it to be a shift. The woman in 3C stood again. She stepped across the aisle and crouched slightly, her eyes apologetic. "Sorry," she said. "I know I keep bothering you, but something happened you should know." Selina nodded. "Patient. There's a group chat," the woman explained. "Passengers, mostly frequent flyers. People are talking. Someone just confirmed your name and posted a link to your agency bio. It's spreading. Civil rights groups are chiming in. Even a senator reposted one of the clips with a statement. Selina sighed softly. I suppose it was inevitable. The woman paused. Are you okay with that? Selina thought about it. She truly did. Then she said, yes. I think it's time people stopped assuming they're invisible when they do harm. And time we stopped thinking dignity means silence. The woman stood. You're braver than most people I know. Selina shook her head gently. No, I just hit my limit in a public place. The woman smiled, then turned and returned to her seat. Selina glanced down at her phone again. New messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. You were incredible. I saw what happened. Proud of you. Can I quote you for my editorial? She didn't respond yet. Instead, she opened her Photos app and looked at the last picture she'd taken before the flight. It was her and her father at the garden behind his retirement home. He had insisted she plant the basil even though she had no time. Nothing grounds you like dirt, he'd said. She'd smiled, worn gloves, dug her hands into the soil. Now she remembered how it felt. Real, messy, alive. That's what this moment was. It was messy, but it was real, and it meant something. The young trainee returned again. This time, no tray, no water, just his presence. I know you're probably tired, he said, but if no one's told you this yet today, thank you for not letting it slide. Selina looked at him. He couldn't have been more than 22, soft eyes, eager to do things right. What's your name? She asked. Jalen. Well, Jalen, she said gently, then let me say this to you. Don't let anyone teach you that doing nothing is easier. It's not. It just lasts longer. Jalen's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded and quietly stepped away. Selina leaned her head back once more. Outside, the clouds rolled past like waves. Inside, change had already started, and it would not be quiet, not anymore. 3,000 miles away from where Flight 728 carved through the clouds, the boardroom of Stratus Jet Airways headquarters was not calm. It was chaos. The 47th floor of the Northbridge Executive Tower had gone from routine end-of-day chatter to full-blown crisis mode in under 10 minutes. Monitors around the room glowed with news feeds and social media dashboards. The largest screen showed a paused live-stream clip Greta Mullins mid-sentence, jaw tense, posture rigid, as she pointed toward a passenger seat just out of frame. Subtitles at the bottom read, "She doesn't belong here." Another monitor showed a graph with a red arrow spiking upward. Mentions $112,000 in 30 minutes. Hashtags, Justice for Selina. Stratos Jet exposed. We saw everything in the center of the room. CEO Leonard Hale stood with his arms crossed tightly across his chest, jaw locked. The man was used to controlling rooms. Now, he could barely control his own breathing. Someone explained to me how this happened, he said quietly. No one answered at first. Then Chloe Wren, head of corporate communications, cleared her throat. She's real, Chloe said. Dr. Selina Ward, Senior Federal Ethics Advisor. She works with the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and the Aviation Oversight Council, platinum clearance, 22-year track record. Leonard stared at her. So we harassed a senior government official on a flight while a teenager live-streamed it. That's the situation, Chloe replied, barely blinking. Legal counsel, Andrew Spence, chimed in, and if I may add, the problem isn't just the harassment. It's the systemic negligence, the fact that she flagged the issue, and we failed to act. and now it's national news. Another executive added, "The FAA is watching. So is the DOT, and congressional offices are calling." Leonard rubbed his temples. "What about the flight attendant, Greta Mullins?" said HR Director Cassandra Boyd. 18 years of service, 5 written complaints, 2 sensitivity training referrals. Nothing ever escalated to this level until now. "She's gone?" Leonard asked. Cassandra nodded, removed from the aircraft, relieved of duty, termination in process. He didn't look satisfied. "Too late," he said. "The footage is already circulating. This isn't just one bad actor. This looks like culture." Chloe turned to her laptop. "We need a public statement within the hour. Something that takes responsibility without admitting liability." Andrew interrupted. "No legal hedging. If we spin this, we lose credibility. Full accountability is the only move now." Silence fell. Everyone waited for Leonard's response. After a long pause, he looked up. "Draft it, own it, then tell the diversity and inclusion team to initiate a full audit of our employee conduct records. Past 5 years, every complaint, every response. I want to know what we've missed." He turned toward Cassandra. "And create a compensation fund, retroactive. Every passenger with a filed discrimination claim gets reviewed and contacted. Set the budget at $5 million to start." Cassandra blinked. "That'll raise eyebrows." "Good," Leonard replied. "Let them know we're finally paying attention." The room shifted. Suddenly, things were moving. Emails flew. Task forces were formed. Legal reviewed contracts. PR began shaping apology drafts with empathy, not defense. But Leonard Hale remained still. In his mind, the only thing louder than the buzzing crisis around him was the single image of a black woman sitting calmly in first class, saying nothing, while the world exploded around her. She hadn't threatened. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. She just didn't move. And it had brought an entire airline to its knees. Meanwhile, on the plane, Selina Ward was unaware of the boardroom's unraveling. She sat quietly in her seat, sipping lukewarm tea, watching the clouds pass like memories too heavy to carry long. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Ellery. "HQ called me. Your presence has triggered formal escalation. Be proud. You did more than most ever get the chance to do." She stared at the message for a moment. Be proud. It wasn't easy. Her face still burned with the echoes of how Greta had spoken to her. Not just the words, but the assumption behind them. The condescension. The certainty that she could get away with it because people like Selina were supposed to make it easier for people like Greta. Not today. Across the aisle, Tessa Bloom had gone quiet. She was editing a caption, drafting a post, something respectful. Something that reflected what she'd witnessed without cheapening it for likes. She looked up. "Dr. Ward," she said softly. "Do you think anything will actually change?" Selina looked at her for a moment before answering. "I think change only starts when people stop asking permission to be seen." Tessa nodded slowly. Then she hit post. And in that moment, the flight continued its path, but the airline was in free fall. The plane drifted high above the Appalachians as evening light began to wash the clouds in soft amber. There was a golden stillness outside the windows, but inside the cabin, the air was different now, lighter somehow, like a collective pressure had lifted without anyone needing to say so. For Dr. Selina Ward, this was not victory. It wasn't triumph either. It was something quieter, deeper, a quiet knowing that today she had held her line, and something had shifted because she did. Her phone buzzed again, a text from a private number. She opened it, a single line. "Your calm just saved us from years of looking away." Thank you. It wasn't signed, but she knew what it meant. This had gone further than a single flight. Stratus Jet was not the same airline it had been when she boarded. Not because the seats had changed, but because the illusion of neutrality had shattered. The mask had slipped, and now, those who used to look away had no choice but to see. She took another sip of tea, now cold, and set the cup aside. Across the aisle, Tessa Bloom looked at her with eyes full of questions, not just about what had happened, but about what came next. Selina knew those eyes. She had once looked at a professor the same way in college, after hearing him speak about protest without shouting, about how silence could be sharper than noise when you knew when to use it. Tessa leaned over, speaking just above a whisper. "They're saying online that you're going to sue. Is that true?" Selina gave a soft smile. "I haven't decided." Tessa looked surprised. Why not? Selina turned slightly in her seat. Her voice was calm, even warm. Because the point isn't to punish, the point is to change what allows it to happen. "But don't you want justice?" Tessa asked. Selina's gaze didn't waver. "I already got it." Tessa blinked. "You did," Selina nodded. "When they told her to leave the plane. When you filmed. When strangers spoke up. That's justice. Not courtroom justice, but the kind that starts something better." Tessa sat back, thoughtful. Selina leaned her head against the window again. Her reflection met her once more, but this time, the face looking back didn't seem tired. It seemed clear. From the front of the cabin, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received confirmation that we'll begin our descent shortly. Weather in D.C. is clear and calm. Thank you again for your patience." As if on cue, seatbacks adjusted and passengers prepared for landing. Selina reached into her satchel and pulled out a folder. Inside was her meeting brief for the Ethics Advisory Council she was scheduled to speak with the next morning. She wasn't going to change her plans. She would walk into that building with the same composure she had shown at 36,000 feet. Only now, the room would feel different, because her name would already be known, not from a press release, but from action. A ripple, small as it seemed, had already begun to move through industries beyond this cabin. In seat 3C, the woman who had thanked her earlier opened her laptop. She, too, was preparing a report, but every few minutes she would glance toward Selina, as if drawing steady breath just from her presence. The young flight attendant trainee, Jalen, returned one final time before descent. "I just wanted to say again," he said quietly, "you've changed the way I'll do this job forever." Selina nodded once, then it was worth it. He smiled, then disappeared down the aisle. As the plane dipped gently into descent, Selina felt the quiet press of gravity again, but this time it felt earned, not a pull downward, just a reminder that the earth was still beneath her. That flight was always temporary, but impact that could last. The landing was smooth. Applause broke out, not loud, just enough to acknowledge relief. Travelers stretched, buckles clicked, phones were turned back on. Selina waited, not because she wanted to, because she had learned that sometimes the last to stand had the clearest path out. Tessa stood beside her as they waited to exit the row. "Are you going to talk about this on the news?" "I'll speak when it matters," Selina said. Not because it's trending. Tessa smiled. You're amazing. Selena looked at her gently. No, I'm just prepared. As passengers began exiting row by row, Selena took one last look around the cabin. It looked like every other first-class cabin: leather seats, glossy tray tables, soft lighting, but it wasn't the same. Not anymore. As she stepped into the aisle and walked toward the jet bridge, phones discreetly filmed again, not in a way that felt invasive, in a way that felt like witness. A woman beside the door offered a nod. A man in uniform stepped aside with respect. No one said anything grand, but they didn't need to. Sometimes change doesn't need a banner, it just needs to be seen. As Selena stepped off the plane, a gust of evening air met her. Cool, steady, free. By the time Dr. Selena Ward stepped into her hotel room in Washington, D.C., the weight of the day had begun to settle on her shoulders. The soft lighting, cool sheets, and distant hum of city traffic through the windows offered a temporary quiet, but her mind was anything but still. She dropped her carry-on beside the armchair, took off her blazer, and sat down slowly. Her phone vibrated again, face down on the side table. She let it ring this time. She already knew what it was: media outlets, colleagues, advocacy organizations, and maybe even a few opportunists trying to spin the moment into something marketable. But this wasn't about visibility. It was about accountability. She opened her laptop, still wearing her travel clothes. A headline glowed on the screen, without her even searching. Airline under fire after government official publicly humiliated on flight calls for reform. Surge below it. A video clip auto-played. It showed Greta's voice, tense and accusatory. The moment Selena calmly handed over her credentials. The officers arriving, then her call. The call that had shifted everything. Selena closed the laptop gently. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she checked it. A message from Marcus Ellery. Tomorrow's meeting agenda updated. You're leading the new passenger bias accountability session. FAA asked for your direct involvement in writing the industry-wide reform memo. Congrats. But also, thank you. Selena leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. She hadn't wanted the spotlight, but she had always wanted the system to change. Now, the door was open, and she wasn't going to waste the invitation. The next morning, the conference room at the Department of Federal Accountability was packed. Suits and ties, dresses and laptops, cups of black coffee lined up on the side counter like sentries. Selena entered quietly. No announcement needed. When she walked in, heads turned not out of spectacle, but out of respect. Even those who didn't know her by name recognized her from the flight footage. Marcus stood to greet her. You ready? Selena nodded. I've been ready. The meeting opened with a presentation from the Aviation Compliance Division. A representative from the FAA displayed a slide New Passenger Rights Initiative 2025. A dozen faces around the table turned to Selena. She stood, stepped toward the projector, and clicked the next slide. It was simple. A white background with one sentence in bold bias is not a technical issue. It's a structural one. She let the room read it in silence. Then she spoke. Yesterday, a flight attendant questioned my right to be in a seat I had paid for, earned, and been assigned. That wasn't about policy. It was about perception. And perception, unchecked, becomes practice, practice becomes culture, and culture becomes law without ever being voted on. No one interrupted. She clicked again. The slide read 3 principles for ethical travel standards below it. 1. Real-time incident documentation and accountability tracking. 2. Mandatory recurring anti-bias certification for all frontline staff. 3. Creation of an independent civilian oversight board to audit airline behavior quarterly. These aren't just ideas, she said. They're necessities, and they're overdue. She paused, then added, "If you think this was a one-time thing, then you haven't been listening. The stories are out there. Most just don't get filmed." The room nodded slowly, even the skeptics. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching. She was in her element now, and no one could stop the wave she had begun. Later that afternoon, Stratus Jet Airways released a public statement. It read, "In part, we failed. There is no defense, only responsibility. We offer a full and unconditional apology to Dr. Selina Ward and to every passenger who has ever been made to feel they did not belong. We are restructuring our training, rewriting our policies, and rebuilding our trust." Attached to the statement was a photo of a signed commitment, $12 million allocated to a newly formed Passenger Dignity and Equity Council. Independent, transparent, federally supervised. Selina read it once, then twice. It was more than she had expected, but not more than she had believed possible. At her hotel desk, she opened an email from a student she had mentored years ago. "I saw the video. You didn't flinch. You made space for people like me to feel seen. Thank you." She exhaled slowly. She did not respond right away. Some things deserved to just sit for a while, like quiet victories that didn't need an audience. That evening, she walked into a small bookstore near DuPont Circle, a place she used to visit before meetings in D.C. when she was still new to the work. She browsed the shelves with no purpose. Her hand stopped on a book titled Grace in Resistance. She smiled. Fitting. As she turned to leave, a voice called softly behind her. "Excuse me, are you Dr.?" Ward Selina turned. A young woman stood by the new releases section, holding her phone nervously. "Yes," Selina said, her tone kind. "I just wanted to say what you did. It mattered. To a lot of people. My mom cried watching the video. She's been a flight attendant for 25 years. She said no one ever stands up without shouting." Selina nodded gently. "I'm glad it reached her. Can I give you a hug?" Selina hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and wrapping her arms around the young woman in a soft, human moment free from screens or statements. It was quiet, it was real, and it meant everything. The airport was quieter now. The rush of the day's flights had slowed, and the last few passengers filtered through the terminal's wide glass doors. Dr. Selina Ward stood near the gate, her carry-on beside her, a soft smile touching her lips. The weight she'd carried for months had lifted, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. She glanced at her boarding pass, seat 2A, the same seat she had sat in weeks ago during that fateful flight. This time, the journey felt different, not because the cabin was new or the route longer, but because she carried something stronger than documents or badges. She carried change. As she walked down the jet bridge, familiar faces greeted her, some with nods, others with quiet smiles. The new crew was different, trained not just in safety, but in respect and empathy. Selina took her seat by the window. The leather was smooth, the tray table clean. She reached for her phone and saw a message from Tessa Bloom. "Thank you for showing me how to stand. I'm going to keep telling the story." Selina smiled and typed back, "Keep your voice loud in your own way." The engines hummed softly as the plane taxied. Outside, clouds rolled like mountains, vast and endless. The city below shrank into a grid of lights and shadows. Selina leaned her head against the cool glass and closed her eyes. There was power in quiet strength, in calm resolve, in knowing when to speak and when to listen. She thought of her mother's words again. "Dignity is yours. No one can take it unless you let them." Her heart swelled with that truth. Around her, passengers settled in. A young black girl in the next row looked out the window, her eyes wide with wonder. Selina caught her gaze and offered a gentle smile. The girl smiled back, shy but bright. A small moment passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of paths shared, battles fought, and futures claimed. Selina's phone buzzed again. A news alert. Stratus Jet Airways announces sweeping reforms after publicized discrimination incident. The article detailed new policies, staff retraining, independent oversight, passenger compensation, words that meant hope. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but relief. Relief that the story she had lived, the fight she had quietly waged, was becoming a story of change. She opened her eyes and watched the horizon. Justice didn't roar from mountain tops. Sometimes it moved like the steady hum of a plane climbing higher. Steady, unstoppable. As the plane soared toward the sky, Selina whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Because when dignity is defended, doors open, barriers fall, and futures are made better not just for one, but for all. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We thank you for choosing Stratus Jet Airways. Enjoy your flight." Selina leaned back, a soft smile on her face, and let the quiet victory settle. The sky was vast, and so was hope. Dr. Selina Ward's story is a powerful reminder that the fight against discrimination is far from over. But it also shows the extraordinary strength found in calm resilience and unwavering dignity. It's about the silent battles waged in everyday moments, the courage to stand firm when society tries to push you aside, and the impact one person can have when they refuse to be invisible. Her quiet defiance didn't just reclaim a seat. It sparked a reckoning that forced an entire airline to confront its biases, remake its policies, and begin to rebuild trust with those it once overlooked. But beyond the headlines and reforms lies a deeper truth: every person deserves to be seen, respected, and valued for who they are, not judged by assumptions or appearances. As we reflect on this journey, let us honor the strength it takes to stand up with grace and reject the ignorance that allows discrimination to persist. Let Dr. Ward's story inspire us to listen more closely, speak more boldly, and act more justly in our own lives. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you found this story impactful, please like, share, and subscribe to Real Life Stories New. More stories of courage and change are coming. Stay with us and keep the conversation alive. Your voice can be the start of the next chapter.